It's Vito Chirco from Top Cat Sales in downtown Royal Oak. Are you looking for team apparel for your high school, your club sports team, or your corporation? Well, if so, then look no further than Top Cat Sales, located on the east side of Main Street in downtown Royal Oak between 11 and 12 Mile. Through founder and former University of Michigan quarterback John Wangler's leadership, Top Cat Sales has developed a tradition of selling and distributing custom Adidas team apparel with the very highest quality and the very best service. So get your organization, your school, or club team all in with Adidas today by going online to TopCatTeamSales.com. Once again, the website for Top Cat Sales is TopCatTeamSales.com. And remember to follow Top Cat Sales on Twitter at Team Top Cat.
This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I'm your host, Vito Jerome Chirco, fired up and re-energized for a new year of doing the podcast. 2017 has struck us. It is upon us, Doc. Very much upon us. And welcome to the podcast. We have exciting news regarding another podcast as well that we're coming out with this week. And first and foremost, how was your New Year's Eve and celebrating New Year's Day with your family? How did that go, Doc?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, Vito. Great to podcast with you. Always good to fire up the studio. When you come in, I get excited to record with you. Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to record the Two Bad Hombres podcast a little bit later today. It'll be released later this week. And my New Year's was festive. I got a chance to spend time with the family as I was on vacation from the practice. And New Year's Day was, if you're a sports lover's dream here in Detroit, if you love sports, it was amazing. You had the Red Wings playing the Maple Leafs, outdoor game, Centennial Classic. It was a great hockey game. Unfortunately, the Wings lost. You had the Pistons, and then the finale, you had the Detroit Lions. And obviously, it was one of those things where it was disappointing, but in the end, I started off the day watching Michigan basketball, and someone that I knew was talented went off. DJ Wilson for Michigan basketball had an unbelievable game versus Iowa, and it was just a great day from start to finish, watching sports. So New Year's Day was just a perfect day, and I'm looking forward to the new year of podcasting with you and talking about all things Detroit Tigers, because this year I do feel it's going to be an important year, like many years, but this year in particular, the 2017 season for the Detroit Tigers is going to be very, very important, and I'm looking forward to getting your opinions on what's been happening, and obviously the news that of what the Cleveland Indians did has kind of sent shockwaves through the AL Central, and we'll start with that, is that Cleveland kind of solidified their lineup offensively by adding Encarnacion on a great deal for them. There was talk that Encarnacion was shopping himself around, but in the end, Cleveland locked him down. And we'll talk about it in a second. When you look up and down that lineup, with barring any injuries, that lineup for Cleveland is a little bit scary.
It is. You've got Carlos Santana, Michael Brantley coming back, being fully healthy perhaps. If he is, along with Edwin Encarnacion, slotting him in the middle of the lineup of that Indians order, you've got an extremely solid lineup that is deeper than last season when they reached the World Series. And I strongly believe, and I've talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast and with my brother, with my dad, Jerome Chirco, about the fact that I believed that the Indians had to make this move, had to sign Edwin Encarnacion to get back to the World Series in 2017. In other words, to have a legitimate shot at reaching the Fall Classic once again, they had to get a big bat like Edwin Encarnacion, Doc.
How amazing is that Cleveland's like, you know what, we just have to part ways with Napoli for Encarnacion. So 1 through 9, Carlos Santana, 2, Kipnis, 3, Francisco Lindor, 4, Edwin Encarnacion, 5, Jose Ramirez, 6, Michael Brantley, 7, Tyler Naquin, 8, Lonnie Chisenhall, and 9, Yan Gomes.
Now remember, Yan Gomes was hurt last year, And he's got to be healthy because their catching position was horrible. If you look at the combined average of their catchers, the average wasn't very good for those guys. So those guys have to improve. And then Jose Ramirez, he came out of nowhere last season. Utility specialist, played all over the field at third base as well, was solid with the bat, and had a few clutch hits for the Tribe. Thing is, once again, he came out of nowhere. Can he sustain that productivity in 2017? If not, then a lot of the productivity falls upon the shoulders of, well, Michael Brantley, a guy that missed almost all of last season, played 11 games last year. So a lot is on his shoulders, and a lot is riding on the shoulders of Edwin Encarnacion, and even more than the Jays, relied upon him because they had, remember, Joey Bats with him. They had Josh Donaldson, an MVP player. They had Troy Tulowitzki. So the Jays had other big-time bats. Indians have their solid bats, including Francisco Lindor, a guy that can't not be mentioned, because he's this guy that will be, I think, a vital member of their club for a long, long time, and an all-star, perennial all-star possibly, a guy that can be an all-star year in, year out. So I like what the Indians have, but they're relying upon Edwin Encarnacion, I would say even a lot more than what the Jays had to rely upon him for, even though he was always very productive with the Jays too.
And with the Indians, you got to remember, that starting lineup was ravaged by injury later in the season. And when you look at the ERAs for the projected rotation next year, there's only one pitcher north of 4 in the ERA, and that's Josh Tomlin. Corey Kluber, ERA 2.93, Carlos Carrasco 3.17, Danny Salazar 3.57, Trevor Bauer 3.96. So you would expect that the Cleveland Indians rotation can do something. So as you're sitting here with the Detroit Tigers and you're looking, oh boy, the Cleveland Indians are going all in. I mean, when they got a taste of the World Series, getting so close that within one rain delay away from winning the World Series, having Game 7 at their house, losing to the Chicago Cubs was obviously devastating to them. And the Detroit Tigers now are going to be looking up again versus the Cleveland Indians. And so, I wanted to ask you, what did you think contributed to the Indians' dominance over the Tigers in 2016? Because you don't really see, when you play a division foe that many times, where you have one team dominate another team. Usually it's around a little bit, over 500, 2 or 3 games either way. But in 2016, the Indians were just able to dominate the Detroit Tigers. And in years past, the Indians were a squad that the Tigers kind of would take advantage of. And it was weird, too, because Minnesota was able to have some success, and they were in the bottom of the division versus the Indians. So that was quite interesting to look at how many times the Twins were able to defeat the Indians. But the Tigers really struggled versus a division foe when you thought that, my goodness, this was, a matchup that, hey, if you just kind of, showed up in half the games, you would have a much better record.
Well, the thing is, the Indians performed well without Michael Brantley, without Yan Gomes in their lineup. And that's what it comes down to. The production out of guys that were bench players on the Indians. These guys that stepped up and got it done for the Tribe, or at least other guys that maybe at other positions, such as Jose Ramirez coming out of nowhere being this utility specialist for the Tribe in 2016. And then, you know what? You've got on the Tribe Yan Gomes coming back and Roberto Perez as a backup. Perez really didn't hit. Yan Gomes really didn't hit. Once again, Brantley was out besides for 11 games in 2016. And the Tribe continued to hit because of production out of other guys, such as Francisco Lindor, this phenom that really rose to the occasion and had his coming out party, obviously, in 2016. He's a stud now. He's a guy that you can expect to be an all-star performer year in, year out. Kipnis had a really good season. Carlos Santana had a really good year. Now, if they sustain that productivity and get production out of Yan Gomes, out of Michael Brantley in 2017, they can be expected to reach the World Series once again. And now, because of the fact that they also have added Edwin Encarnacion to the middle of their order. So it's about really the Tribe staying healthy. And for 2016, what they did and why they beat up on the Tigers so much, it was because of the Tigers' lack of depth at the end of the rotation. Guys getting hurt like Jordan Zimmerman and having to rely upon guys that weren't good enough to get it done in their starting rotation, such as Mike Pelfrey, Anibal Sanchez every fifth day. And then also because the Tribe had the magnificent 1-5 rotation. The depth that the Tigers couldn't even come close to matching. And then at the back end of their pen, the Indians had the depth that the Tigers couldn't even come close to matching. And like I said, once again, when the Indians succumbed to injury at times, to the like of Michael Brantley, to Yan Gomes, they sustained productivity with other guys stepping up, even if it wasn't at their respective positions. And getting a guy like Brandon Geyer, an outfielder that stepped in and performed for the Tribe. So guys just time after time came up with the hits, even when they weren't expected to. Now for the Tigers, it wasn't the same case, where guys that weren't expected to come up with the hits came up with the hits big time in 2016. And that's where all of that added up was the big discrepancy between the Tribe and the Tigers in 2016, in my opinion, Doc.
The Tigers played the Indians 18 times. They lost 14 of them.
Yep.
The Indians went 14-4 against the Tigers. When you look at all the numbers, they're astounding in that when the Indians faced the Tigers, a lot of their numbers went up. It was unbelievable that the Tigers' ERA collectively was about 4.24. But when the Indians showed up, the ERA just ballooned to 5.79. The Indians' batters did a lot better job against the Tigers' pitchers, and it just seemed like collectively that when the Tigers faced the Indians, they weren't able to get them out. They weren't able to get the clutch hit. The starters weren't able to do some things. I mean, Jordan Zimmermann was a guy that you counted on with a big money deal, but when he faced the Indians, you know, the Indians batters batted .379 against Jordan Zimmermann. So there were some batters that had some successes that were statistically above average versus some Tigers pitchers, and it's one of those things where you can't have that happen, obviously, going forward in 2017. So that's why I pinpointed it, you know, talking about it for this podcast, is that against your rivals, you have to, you know, step it up and go out there and compete. And in 2016, the Tigers did not do that, and I'm a little bit worried that in 2017, now I doubt it's going to be 14-4, but I would fully expect of the 18 games, you know, in the matchup that the Indians probably win 10, 11 of them.
Well, I was going to say this, too. You know what? The Indians could be substantially better as a ball club in 2017, win more regular season games, and still might not beat up on the Tigers as frequently as they did in 2016. It never happens that way, where a team really beats up on a foe as much as they did from one season to the next. It seems like there's always a drop-off, at least a small drop-off. And I see that happening between the Tigers and Indians head-to-head in 2017 as well, where you might see the Indians winning 10 times out of 18, something like that, where it's more of an even playing field and more of even results, where the Tigers win a few more games in 2017 against the Indians than they did in 2016, in my opinion. And once again, even though the Indians could be substantially better as an entire ball club, I think they will be too, based on moves now that they've made. And having Andrew Miller now on the ball club for a full season, having him there as well at the back end of the pen, having Brantley coming back, also having Edwin and Canarsie own. They have all these guys now. Yan Gomes, if he's fully healthy, and a guy like Roberto Perez, a backup catcher. And I mentioned these backups. Well, you know what? These catchers for the Indians didn't really do anything as a respective whole in 2016. But you see now Perez's numbers in the postseason, he came up with 3 home runs in the 2016 postseason. And when you compare, the Tigers didn't make the playoffs, obviously, but the Indians did because of performances by Geyer, by, you know, guys that weren't as expected, by Jose Ramirez and others. And that was a big Mike Napoli, Rajai Davis. Those guys came out of nowhere. Now Napoli looks like he might be signing with the Rangers, and he'll be leaving the Indians for sure. Davis probably isn't coming back. So they've got to get those kind of performances once again, but they could still and probably still will be substantially better. And for the Tigers' sake, if they want to be substantially better and beat up on the Indians a little bit more and actually, let's say, get 8 wins against the Indians in 2017, well, for that to happen, they've got to get performances as well from backups or unheralded performers. And that's the way the Indians got it done primarily in 2016, and the reason why they reached the Fall Classic. And in 2017, they might be a better ball club and actually have a tougher time of beating the Tigers head-to-head. Yet, relying upon some better performers on a consistent basis should allow them to have a legitimate shot at returning to the Fall Classic, something you couldn't truly say about the Indians before they signed Edwin and Canarsie own. And wanted to ask you, Doc, really quick here about the Tigers. And we saw the injury bug just get the best of the Tigers. Indians, not as much. Once again, a reason why they were able to get into the playoffs and get to the Fall Classic. Now, for the Tigers' sake, if they would have had Nick Castellanos healthy for a larger portion of the season, as well as JD Martinez healthy for a larger portion of the season, and Jordan Zimmermann healthy for a larger portion of the season, do you think the Tigers could have made the playoffs? And really, more of the question is, if they would have had those guys all healthy, should they have made the playoffs in 2016? Because I think you could argue they really should have, and you can take away some of the blame you have to place upon Brad Ausmus and their woes as a whole last year because of those injuries. Or if they didn't have those injuries and had those guys healthy like Castellanos and JD Martinez, you would almost have to say that the Tigers should have made it in 2016. And then if they didn't, maybe Tigers would have fired Brad Ausmus, and rightfully so. What do you think, Doc?
Well, when you look at, and when we talk about the Detroit Tigers, what was their goal? Their goal in the last stretch of years here, in the last few seasons, was to win it all. And so, when you look at the teams that made the postseason, the Tigers don't stack up at all. So you look at collectively as a unit, you're not going to win a championship when when your offense strikes out that many times. You're not going to win a World Series when you have, a bunch of rookie pitchers. There's very few major league caliber teams that are, on the verge of winning the World Series that feature young arms. They're, look at the Chicago Cubs. They're, closer, but they also have veterans, and look who they relied upon, John Lester, right? That was a guy that ate up a ton of innings. And so the Detroit Tigers would have relied upon Zimmerman and Justin Verlander, and I believe that had they gotten to the postseason, hey, they could have done some things if they were all healthy and things like that. But the way I look at it is you had holes in way too many places. You had a bullpen that, hey, had the starters gotten you 6 strong innings, quality starts per se, then when they got to the bullpen, there was nobody that you would have relied upon that you would have thrown out there. Shane Green was inconsistent. You had situations where, at different times, different relievers would lose it. You were featuring, Anibal Sanchez, and when he would come out, he would throw 1 or 2 decent innings, and then he would, allow some hits and home runs and things like that. So collectively, what the problem was, and I think we talked about it on numerous podcasts, and I've talked about it with a lot of different people, was collectively, for whatever reason, the Tigers were not able to put it all together consistently enough throughout the entire season. Meaning that when the starters would play well, then the offense would go cold. Or when the offense needed the starters to do some things and maybe give them a couple run cushion, then the starters would go out there and have a terrible performance. Or when the starters and the offense was going well and got into the 8th and 9th inning, then the bullpen would collapse.
Yep.
So they were trying to plug too many different holes all at the same time. And when you look at it, I would say that what the Tigers need to do collectively is find a way to play consistent baseball across multiple domains, meaning that the defense and offense has to be working in a symbiotic relationship. The starters and the bullpen have to be in sync, and you have to avoid the key injuries. But what happens when you have a team that's a little bit older? You have injuries. You had injuries this year to JD Martinez, Nick Castellanos. You had some injuries that really derailed you, but you were also carried by, those guys when they did return. Miguel Cabrera did his thing. V-Mart had an up and down year, but collectively you just say that, hey, there were too many holes outside of the big guns. Justin Upton didn't show up until the second half of the season. That you can't just play a half of a season and expect that your team is just going to be right there at the end. Now, you could say, hey, this team also lacked the clutch gene because they were in it right up until that final series versus Atlanta. What did they do there? Squadoosh. And it was a terrible situation. So I can understand why they're, unfortunately, probably looking now to change what they're calling it now with this squad, and that they know they're not World Series caliber, whether it be a rebuild, whether it be a retool, whatever you call it. This squad going forward in 2017, 2018 is going to look a little bit different, and it's just going to get incrementally harder because the teams in the division are trying to get better as well. And one team you can obviously see is going for it all, and they have all the pieces in place with great offense, great pitching, a decent bullpen, and obviously the best probably reliever in all of baseball in 2016 was Andrew Miller.
He's an ace relief pitcher, Andrew Miller. Now having him for a full season on their staff, they should be magnificent, and they are loaded an all-around ball club that is significantly better than the Tigers, who haven't even upgraded their bullpen. And you brought up how in 2016, they had the problems with their rotation one day, then their bullpen the next. The Indians never suffered those issues. Remember, they had both going for them, and now, perhaps even more with Miller in their bullpen for a full 2017 campaign. And then the clutch gene was another difference maker for the Tribe, getting that out of Jose Ramirez and others in 2016. They have a bunch of these guys coming back in 2017, plus Edwin Encarnacion. They, once again, I have to reiterate the point. They are significantly better than the Tigers. They really are. Tigers right now, in my opinion, have no chance. And until they upgrade their bullpen and do so significantly, whether it be on the cheap or by making some trades that maybe cost some young talent, and which I believe they won't do and shouldn't do, but until they upgrade their bullpen, they're a distant second place ball club in the AL Central. So I see the Indians right now steamrolling through the Central, which has been depleted. It really has been by the Twins going through a rebuild. The Royals now looking like they're going to jumpstart a rebooting process, at least. And the White Sox are going through a full-fledged rebuild mode. Maybe even trading Jose Quintana coming up and Jose Abreu. So big-time players being moved from the south side of Chicago, eliminating teams in that Central Division from competing for a division crown in 2017. Right now, it's the Indians and everybody else. And I would say the Tigers are the second best team, but the gap between the Tribe and the Tigers is significant right now. And being the second place ball club in the Central, what does it really mean for the Tigers? Doesn't say a ton and doesn't mean they have a great shot at reaching the playoffs. And I think they won't have really even a solid shot at reaching the postseason until they upgrade their bullpen and do so once again significantly, Doc.
The Tigers made a move, though. They signed former Cardinals closer Edward Mujica.
Saw that to a minor league deal, right?
Yep, 32 years old, has 50 career saves, but where did he pitch in 2016? Nowhere. He was not in Major League Baseball last year. He was splitting time between the AAA affiliates of the Phillies, Kansas City Royals, and Minnesota Twins. And again, you look at it, they're trying to basically, and I hate to say that, but they're trying to find diamonds in the rough.
They are. Way too often. All these minor league deals. Mujica, Omar Infante, a former Tiger now back in the minors with the Tigers. I mean, they don't bring any luster, right? They're lackluster, and it's sad to say that the Tigers are doing this and the Indians are making all these are looking like a great ball club. And it looks like, once again, the gap is significant between the Indians and Tigers. And the Tigers' biggest move of date is adding Alex Avila, the GM's son, nepotism, right? Well, a guy that was a Tiger previously, back with the Tigers now on a one-year deal, and that's our best deal so far. That's not going to catapult the Tigers over the top. You know, it's not going to do so, Doc.
So refresh my memory, the podcast before the holiday break, we obviously talked about the potential free agent catchers, and we had said that probably based upon the numbers, based upon what the Tigers need and the familiarity that Avila has with the squad, didn't we just say that it's probably expected that we thought that Avila was going to come back?
Absolutely. We thought he was the best candidate, even though, remember, it sounded like he priced himself out of the Tigers market for adding a backup catcher. But now he's back in Motown, and you truly can't expect a ton from him. He's an upgrade over Jared Saltalamacchia, but not a difference-making catcher, a player that can put the Tigers over the top and help them dethrone the Indians. Right now, once again, the gap is significant, and I could go on and on about that, but that is the point. There's nothing else about it. No other way to slice it. The Tigers are a distant second-place ball club in the Central. And the thing is, does that mean they're good enough to win a wild card spot, with there being two wild card teams in the AL, in the National League as well? Right now, as this distant second-place ball club that hasn't added anybody of note, and the only layer that will truly contribute to the Major League roster that they have added is Alex Avila. So with all that being said, Doc, can we say the Tigers at least have a shot at making the wild card next season?
No, I would say that going into it, you have to be realistic, and that the expectation is going to be that the Indians are going to be the class of the Central, and the Tigers are probably going to be in that same mid 80s wins wise, and
maybe even less right now. I mean, look at their pen, like we talked about, their options right now going into 2017. And then the fact that they dealt Cameron Maybin. Might have had a career aberration, but how great was he, towards the top of their lineup, getting on base? He did it all, Cameron Maybin. Replacing his production, what he did in 2016, and now with the likes of Jacoby Jones out there in center field, maybe seeping as low as Anthony Gose. Good luck to the Tigers in center field then with those guys. Even in a platoon with those guys that maybe even also consists of Tyler Collins.
And I'm reading here on the Detroit News, Chris McCoskey did a decent article.
A decent only?
It was okay. Hey, I'm just briefly scrolling through it right now. And so he asked the question that we're asking is that, can the same old Tigers realistically challenge the Indians? And he gives some points, and he gives 5 points. Obviously, the path to the playoffs is to, get production from the rotation, beat the Indians. And a point that I want to bring up is, at this point in time, the only 2 major league roster moves that the Tigers have made are to let go of Cameron Maben and to sign catcher our boy Alex Avila. That's the only moves they've made. And so the point that he makes that is a really good one, and we'll talk about it probably in future editions, is last year you had an emergence of a couple guys. You had the emergence of Michael Fulmer, who many thought was going to be that guy, but he emerged. The Tigers are going to be counting on the same production without injuries from Miguel Cabrera, Justin Verlander, Jordan Zimmerman, Justin Upton. Okay, Victor Martinez obviously in the mix, but who knows, what kind of production you're going to get from him as he continues to age. But the point that McCoskey makes, and one that, we'll start to think about, is we need an emergent player from another group, from the younger crop, from Jose Iglesias, from James McCann, from potentially Jacoby Jones, if he's going to be the center fielder, Justin Wilson, Shane Green. We're going to need emergence, a surprise player that's going to do more than what's expected of him. And I think as we sit here, and the look that you're giving me is that you're probably, as we sit here today, probably thinking, more of the same. They're going to fall within their mean. But for the Tigers, what they need is, obviously, with the lack of moves, what they need is one of those core group of younger guys that they've slotted to play for the Tigers to step it up and have an above-average season. And maybe it's going to probably, the first guy you look at is maybe Castellanos, who, without the injury, probably was on pace for a 25 to 30 home run season.
And now him coming back in 2017, is he going to be as good as he was in 2016? Him, Fulmer, Norris have to be as good and then take steps forward as well. Guys like McCann, Iglesias, Justin Wilson, all those guys have to take steps forward. Maybe even Shane Green. But it's not an exciting group of players that we think can take a significant step forward too. Jay Wilson, I like Justin Wilson. He can be good, but he's a reliever that doesn't make an impact on the ball club that's significant as a lefty out of the pen, and maybe a more reliable late inning option out of the pen as a left-hander. Something that the Tigers need. But the thing is, having him take a step forward doesn't mean the Tigers will as a collective whole. They need Iglesias also to take a step forward. They need James McCann also to take a step forward. And my prediction is that McCann, fully healthy, can, but is it going to be a significant step forward? A significant enough step forward? And I don't see it happening out of Jose Iglesias. But maybe Rondon, another name, can do. I think he will. I think McCann can. I think slightly McCann can, at least. Isn't that kind of hard to say? McCann can. Isn't that something? But I think he can slightly. I think Rondon can slightly. I think Justin Wilson can slightly. But like Shane Green or Jose Iglesias and Castellanos being as good, Fulmer being as good, and my brother has spoken about it, kind of to dog me as a Tigers fan, but he has said it now constantly, that he could see Fulmer regressing, having a sophomore slump. And a lot of sophomores do after a great rookie campaign. So remember that about Michael Fulmer as well in the back of your head. There is a possibility he does take at least a slight step back. So right now I see the Tigers, with all of this being said by you and I and our negativity about what we see for the Tigers, I see them as a 79 to 83 win ball club, which isn't good enough to make the playoffs even as a wild card. And I could see the Indians winning 90 plus games easily right now, and especially because the AL Central has been weakened, and even the Tigers have.
Oh boy, Vito. So you just poo-pooed everything I said. No optimism right now.
Not a ton.
As we start the new year, you don't have any optimism, huh?
A slight amount out of McCann, like I said, maybe. I think Rondon could be one of the biggest surprises, positive surprises, and biggest difference makers, because they need a better back end of the pen. And if they're not going to add any guys, it doesn't look like they're going to at this point, as we've already started 2017. And the biggest move to their ball club was getting Alex Avila. No bullpen arms added. Well, Edward Mujica. Mujica really going to do anything for you in 2017 after last season when he did nothing? Absolutely no. So they got to have Rondon step up. K-Rod even be, well, at least as good. Shane Green be better. Justin Wilson, Alex Wilson be better as well consistently and from the start of 2017. If that's the case, the Tigers have a slight chance at least to make the wild card. But winning the division, I see there being no chance right now. That's how negative I think of the Tigers right now and their division chances. They have no chances, is what I'm saying. For you, Doc, though, it sounds like you're kind of on the bandwagon with me. But over or under 50%, playing Big Vito's over under for the Tigers winning the division in 2017.
Oh, under.
Now, how significantly under for you?
I would say 20%.
Yeah.
I would say you would probably have to have a catastrophic injury to the Indians at this point in time. You slot the Indians atop the AL Central, and you hope that your starting rotation can emerge and that you don't have any setbacks. And then, hey, as I'm reading these articles, as I'm looking forward here, I can understand what the organization is trying to do. And stay tuned for future editions of the Tigers Talk podcast that comes out every single Wednesday on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. We'll kind of peek into certain players and see what they've done in the last couple years and see what they potentially need to do to help this Tiger squad. Because unfortunately, Vito, it is what it is. We have this squad. We're not probably going to add any more pieces. So all we can do is position by position, look at a couple different players and what they can contribute and what they've done in years past. And we'll obviously play several rounds of Big Vito's over under in terms of each individual player's contributions in 2017. And we'll get you ready for when the pitchers do report for spring training. It's getting there. Whenever the new year turns, you know that it's within 70 days or so of pitchers and catchers reporting to Lakeland. It's going to hit. March is going to hit here pretty quickly. So we'll go through it and we'll talk about certain players that we think have to step it up. And and if the Tigers continue to make minor league signings, hey, we'll talk all about it. But I think what we'll be talking about is what other teams are doing and how the Tigers are going to, try their best with what they have to match up. And hey, if you have to have a little bit of hope, you got to have something. You got to have a little bit of hope, Vito. Little.
I'll try to. Now, really quick, if the Tigers go into opening day with this current roster, do we blame more of it upon the shoulders of Al Avila and the front office, or the ownership group led by possibly Chris Ilitch at this point? Who do you blame more?
You got to blame them combined. I mean, you blame more obviously Chris Ilitch because the checkbook is closed. It's a big formula in that attendance has gone down. They don't want to lose money. They've realized that we can't continue to pump out $200 million salaries and not make the playoffs, or when we do, not only get one round of games there, because you got several guys making $20 million plus per season. So the balance books has to be done, and so they're now starting the process of delicately balancing, shifting their focus of getting cheaper players at the same time trying to be competitive. I think, though, the distance between where they need to go to get to the postseason isn't as big as we're seemingly trying to make it, but they need a lot of things to go right. And with that said, we're not confident that, they're going to have 6 guys step it up and plug all the holes. If Jordan Zimmerman takes a step back, Justin Verlander a year older, all these guys are a year older, and you still have right now the core of that craptastic bullpen that we have yet to see get destroyed. I think everybody would just be happy, and you probably would put some asses in the seats if he just went out there and just said, Shane Green's gone, Justin Wilson's gone, Rondon's gone. We're starting our bullpen with Francisco Rodriguez and nothing else. Let's just start over and plug new people. But right now, it's disappointing that, at game one, that you might have the same thing of Anibal Sanchez, Shane Green, Francisco Rodriguez trying to close out a game.
Makes us sick as Tigers fans. And then JV has to be masterful JV and must-see JV. Again, a guy that should have won the Cy Young, got snubbed for the Cy Young, has to be that good again as well. Doc, he really does. And so many things have to happen, so many ifs with this ball club, and not as many ifs, right, with the Indians. That's the difference maker right now in the AL Central. And the difference maker on this podcast week in, week out is you, Doc. It really is. Dude. You are the true MVP, and Happy New Year to you and to everybody else out there as well.
And so the resolution for you this year is don't text me we're going to cancel the Tigers Talk podcast, ever.
I can't do that. I know I thought about it for this week because there's not a lot of news. Now, we just kind of talked about the same old stuff, but we had some interesting topics, I believe, as well.
Listen, what the goal of this podcast was, if we were just to go out and have a cocktail and just start talking about baseball, we would have this exact conversation. I would bring up, hey, man, the Indians brought Encarnacion. The Tigers signed nobody. What's going on? How do we do? So this podcast, the one you're listening to right now that you've downloaded on this Wednesday, is what we would do if Vito and I went to the local pub and just started talking baseball. That's my goal. So don't text me that you're going to cancel, because I'm going to say no, because I had stuff prepared. So don't say that again.
I'm glad you have something prepped. Now, we have something prepped as well for the newest podcast, Two Bad Hombres, coming out this Saturday, courtesy of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. And for everybody tuning into this week's edition of Tigers Talk, thank you very much. Happy New Year once again, and have a great week, and talk to you again next week.